Hello everyone, Tyler King here with a new episode of New Review. Today I am reviewing the second album by Yellow Magic Orchestra, Solid State Survivor. Where to even begin with this album? Released in 1979, this is the second album by Yellow Magic Orchestra following their self-titled debut. And I feel like most people, this was my introduction to the band. I was vaguely familiar with Ryuichi Sakamoto's solo material, at least as far as his film compositions were concerned, and I had heard some of his piano improvisations with, I forget exactly who. It was a trio album that had come out something like 10 or so years ago. And I was under the impression that his work with the Yellow Magic Orchestra would sound more avant-garde than it actually does, and I was pleasantly surprised when I finally heard this album. It features, of course, the core lineup of the band: Haruomi Hosono, Ryuichi Sakamoto, and Yukihiro Takahashi, as well as featuring contributions on guitar by Makoto Ayukawa on the song Solid State Survivor and their cover of Day Tripper. Now, when I reviewed the debut album of Yellow Magic Orchestra, I mentioned that it feels like a whole piece of music because of the sequencing and the track order. And I feel the same way with Solid State Survivor, in the sense that I feel like side A and side B are intentionally two very different things. So on side A, you have songs that are, for the most part, completely instrumental. And then side B, you have the songs that have the vocals and that have lyrics. The only song really on the A side that has any vocals is the first song, Technopolis, which really just has this like robotic voice spelling out that word. I think it's a great introduction to the album. I think it is a bit whimsical. It definitely has a very light feel to it. I think that Haruomi Hosono's bass playing on this song is magnificent, particularly the little bit of slap bass that he'll do at the end of kind of each... I mean, since there are no vocals, I couldn't even really call it like a chorus, but there's a set part where it's this very like... You'll hear it. You'll know what I'm talking about. Absolute Ego Dance is even more whimsical. It has a very light feeling to it. The keyboards remind me almost of flutes in this song. My favorite song on the album is the third song on here, Raideen, which, if you look up the band on Apple Music, it's their most popular song on the streaming service. Composed by Yukihiro Takahashi. It is just so... It's not quite epic, but it moves by very briskly. It has a motion to it. It has a forward momentum to it that I think the first two songs on the album aren't bad, but I feel like with the song Raideen is where the album really finds its footing and really starts to come into its own. And I mean, it's just such a superb song. I love in the music video during the more the like spacious bridge part about 3/4 of the way through, when there are these kind of like laser noises, that the band plays with that in the music video by like shooting at each other with laser guns. It's such a fun song, and it's one that I think perfectly sums up this early stage of the band. And what I mean when I say the early stage, I'm referring to their first two albums. Since this was so close to the band's first album, I do think that the two share a few parallels, such as, like I said, each one, I think, very, like, seriously having a certain concept to them. Um, because as the band would go on, and you would get more advancements in technology, they would go on to create more, I suppose one could call them experimental, quote-unquote, like, forward-thinking albums. So I think that the first two of theirs are separate in their discography from the rest of their work. That being said, that isn't to say that the first two are any worse or any better, just that I personally view them separately. And something else about this album that I really want to emphasize is the word orchestra in the band's name, because especially on a song like Opener, Technopolis, or Rydeen, you have all of these intermingling parts of, you know, keyboards, synthesizers, drums, bass, guitar in some parts, and they're all really orchestrated in a way that each part makes sense. And I know that this was something that I really tried to drive home in my review of the debut album, but it's also very much on display here. Like on Technopolis or Absolute Ego Dance, you have these keyboard parts that could easily be traded out for horn parts, or, you know, like whether it be something like a trumpet or a flute. Especially Absolute Ego Dance, where there are these synth parts that sound very much like a flute or a piccolo would. And then closing off side A is the song Castalia. Castalia, which is another Sakamoto composition, feels, and I know that in my review of the debut album, I did a lot of comparisons to Kraftwerk, particularly the Man Machine album, but it really does feel like something from that album, particularly something like Neon Lights or Space Lab or Metropolis, one of the more slower atmospheric numbers. Castalia is a song that I used to not be very warm to, but as I've listened more and more to the album, I think that it's necessary to have a song like that to juxtapose the more lightweightedness of the rest of the album. And that's also mirrored on the B-side by the song Insomnia, which is having it, of course, be on the side that has lyrics. There are, of course, lyrics to the song Insomnia, which helps to create a more definitive idea of what that song could be about. Whereas with Castalia, it's much more to the listener's imagination of what the intent of the song is, what it represents. For me, it just evokes this sense of longing that I think I don't really get from most of the rest of the band's catalog, save maybe for a couple of the songs on the BGM album. And then on side B, we have the song Behind the Mask. And I was thinking about this song before doing this review, and I think that if I had to get rid of every Yellow Magic Orchestra song and keep only one as potentially their greatest achievement, it might be Behind the Mask. I think that the introduction with the twinkling synthesizers is just a thing of beauty for the first half a minute or so of the song, and then you get those sweeping synthesizers, it's just like I get chills every time I listen to this song. The lyrics are sung in what my best friend who listened to this album describes as robot voice. It is, I believe this is Sakamoto singing through a vocoder. And it is a weird juxtaposition to have this very heartfelt and human piece of music with this very inhuman, robotic, emotionless voice singing over top of it. It really gives the song this weird melancholy feel that I think is just astounding. Like I said, this is one of my favorite songs on this album, one of my favorite Yellow Magic Orchestra songs, probably even one of my favorite Sakamoto compositions of all time. And that includes like his amazing, vast amount of solo material. Up next is what I think is a little bit of a divisive song. Their cover of Day Tripper by the Beatles, originally from the album Rubber Soul, I think it was. And I grew up loving the Beatles. They're my absolute favorite band up until I was maybe like 11 or 12 years old. Just obsessed over them, knew literally all of their songs. I could probably still sing you most of the songs. And the Beatles are a band where, whatever your opinion of them is, I feel like you take a really big risk by covering one of their songs, because they are a band that is held in such high regard and almost like a sacred kind of regard from most other bands, that to do a cover of one of their songs, I feel like you really have to make it your own. And I think that some bands have. Susie and the Banshees, for instance, on their covers of Helter Skelter and Dear Prudence. And then Yellow Magic Orchestra on Day Tripper, which is a very Zolo-influenced take on the song, more so than I would argue any other Yellow Magic Orchestra song. The way that it starts and stops and herks and jerks, it feels almost like something like from the first Oingo Boingo album, or something from the first couple of Devo records, or possibly even like Per Ubu. It is so manic and zany sounding and feeling. It's definitely the most animated moment on the album. And I really love the guitar work on this song. And the vocal delivery is a little bit weird. Granted, English is not any of the members of the band's first language, so of course you're going to have some sort of disconnect when a band like this tries to sing in English, or any language that is not their native tongue. The same way that I would probably sound weird if I were to try to sing in Japanese or Spanish or any other language. But I think that having the song on this album really injects it with a bit of vitality that is missing from the rest of the songs. Following this, we have Insomnia. Like I had mentioned before, is another more atmospheric song. It's the slower song on side B. And then the album closes with the title track, Solid State Survivor, which reminds me a bit of Absolute Ego Dance and Technopolis. It drives itself very briskly along. I like the propulsion of it, that like dun 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 synth work. The vocals on here, I think, are great. I also love the guitar work on here. It's just, it feels, I love that it's not pushed to the forefront, but it feels so like manic and angry and intense, which isn't something that you normally associate with a band like Yellow Magic Orchestra. It just has this driving feel to it, this crunching feel to it, like it's racing towards its natural conclusion. I think that it's a perfect way to end the album, and I think that there's no moment on this album that I think is dull, with the possible exception of Insomnia. And even then, I wouldn't necessarily say it's dull. It might just go on for a little bit too long. It could also just be my own personal opinion of it and where I think it falls on the track listing. Having it be between two songs that are very propulsive in nature might not have been the best place for it, but I also don't think it necessarily would work directly following Behind the Mask. So I'm not quite sure where I could put Insomnia on this track listing, but it definitely needs to be on side B to have that juxtaposition of the instrumental songs and the non-instrumental songs. Overall, I think that this is a very fair introduction to the band. I think that if this were to be the first album of theirs that you listen to, I don't know why you wouldn't want to listen to the rest of their output. I would say that while this may not be as groundbreaking as the debut, I tend to listen to this one more and I tend to enjoy it more. Part of that could be it feels like a tighter album. It doesn't have those transitions or those like computer theme sort of interludes that the debut album has, and I think that that makes this one a little bit more of a brisk, for lack of a better term, cohesive listen. I think that the band has really come into their own on this one, and they're all really playing to each other's strengths. And I think that that is something that is going to become more apparent as the band progresses, particularly, well, I'm not going to say on what album I think it is, because I'll just mention it there. But they each fall into their roles in a very seamless way. And I think that it's interesting that you have a band where, at least, you know, like if you see them live, you know, you have Sakamoto behind the keyboards, you have Takahashi behind the drums, you have Hosono playing the bass, or sometimes playing the keyboards. But I think it's so unique and so interesting that each of these members has, like, specific individual songwriting credits on these songs. Like, Raideen is not a song that I would think would have been composed by someone whose primary instrument is the drums, because it isn't, like, it's not the most rhythmic song on the album. And I think that each member bringing their own sort of thing to the table gives this album, and gives really All Magic Orchestra as a whole, a different feeling of something like a band where you really only have maybe one or two primary songwriters out of something like a 5 or 6 person lineup. I'm trying to think of anything else to talk about with this album. It's just so... It's just, I mean, it's another nearly perfect album by this band. I will say, this particular copy of it was gifted to me by my friend Aaron. He recently moved about 3 or so hours away, and he gifted me a lot of records, and this was one of them. And this is a, I think it's a second or third pressing of the album. So not from 1978, but I want to say 1979. And he said that he purchased this at a garage sale while he was visiting Japan. I mean, this is just so... It's so tight and seamless from front to back. And whereas on past albums that I've reviewed, stuff like maybe some of the Peter Murphy solo material, I don't really want to skip anything. I don't want to just jump ahead. I don't want to listen to it out of sequence. I think that this is an album, much like the first one, where it is very rewarding to listen to it from front to back in its entirety. And I think that by doing that, you're, first of all, going to get the best experience of it. I mean, duh. But second of all, you're listening to it the way that they intended. Like, there is thought put into the sequencing of this album, which I think is something that not a lot of people pay attention to anymore. But, I mean, this plays in a very deliberate way. At least I feel that way. And yeah, I'm trying to think of anything else to say about this album that I haven't before. Gosh, yeah, I just think it's a great album. And much like the first one, I would be hard-pressed to put a numerical number on it as far as reviewing it. And it's getting to the point where I feel like I might just stop doing that altogether, because I feel like numerical rating as of late is a bit arbitrary. And, you know, like, for me, you know, this could be a 10 out of 10, the same way that something like, you know, an album that was very important to me when I was a teenager that other people might not like would be a 10 out of 10. But that could be maybe more for, like, nostalgia purposes. I mean, it's a landmark album. It's, I think, just as, maybe not just as groundbreaking as the first one, but it continues their trend of implementing cutting-edge technology with traditional song structure, and also a fair amount of live instrumentation, such as that guitar work on the title track and Day Tripper, and Hisano's amazing bass playing all over this thing, particularly, like I said, on the song Technopolis. Yeah, I really don't think I have anything else to say, because I've already stopped and started this a number of times. So, that is Solid State Survivor by Yellow Magic Orchestra. And what do you think? Is this your favorite Yellow Magic Orchestra album? Is this your least favorite Yellow Magic Orchestra album? I'd really love to know your thoughts about this album in the comments. I really hope that by watching these reviews, if this is a band that you're not familiar with, that you do give them a listen. And if you are interested in seeing reviews like this early, if you're interested in seeing my process behind reviewing these albums, you can always subscribe to my Patreon account, which I will link in the description for this video. For as little as $1 or $2 a month, you're going to get early access. You'll be able to do things like vote on exclusive Patreon review videos. I just put one up, but I'm not going to say what album it is. You will just have to subscribe to my Patreon to get access to it. But yeah, that is Solid State Survivor by Yellow Magic Orchestra, and I am Tyler King with a new review. Until next time, keep listening to great music.